And Crow.
Welcome. Welcome, everybody. And yes, we are actually here in person in Ogden, Utah. But we also have people joining us, whether it is through the live stream or they'll watch the link. Aware that with Story Crossroads, this is the 73rd house concert. I mean, that's like, yeah, 73rd. And we are so pleased to have Ted Erekson to perform. Now, he actually comes way up north, even more north than Ogden, Utah. And I believe it's Providence. Whoa. And if you're not familiar with Providence, you might be familiar with Logan. So it's not too far from Logan, Utah. And we also here outside this lovely shaded area, again, we want to thank the Gibsons for being able to open up this space. And we actually had a story last year. Yes. Last year, we were going to have it outside their backyard and there was rain. But the good thing about house concerts is there was still the inside of the house. And so we all got inside that house and made it all work out. It was really fun. But right now, look at that. Sky looks beautiful here. And Ted Erekson, he is full of energy. He is full of energy. And it is something that's going to explode out. Now, the types of stories, I'm not sure to what percentage are true. It is called fractured fairy and family tales, and fractured in of itself kind of makes you think what percentage is happening. So maybe at the end, I would like for those who are here, even those who are watching, think in your mind, what percentage, guess right now, is going to be true and things that are more true. Yes? All right, let's bring to the stage Ted Erekson.
Hey. That's about right there. Perfect. Thank you. Thanks for being here. I'm excited to be here. And before we get started, I'm going to put this in my pocket here. Let's make it rain. We've had this drought in Utah. So when rain starts, it starts a little soft. Just tap, 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 and rub your hands together. That's it. And it starts to come down a little bit. Starts to come down a little bit more. But thank you. Okay. We're going to start our journey today, and we're going to go to the Emerald Isle of Ireland, where tree turdy is a ting. And I'm so excited because I'm going to tell you a story about a man that lived in Ireland. But this was before there were big cities and before there were small cities. Before there were big towns and before there were small towns. There were just small villages. And in this small village in Ireland, there lived a young man by the name of Barney. Now, 3 things you need to know about Barney. First, he was tall and lanky. Do you know what lanky means? It means tall, kind of like Ichabod Crane-ish, kind of awkward. 2, Barney was extremely lazy. He'd get up late in the morning and he'd lift his spoon to eat his porridge in the morning, and he'd get so tired from that he'd go back to bed for several hours. His hair was always a mess. His clothes were always dirty. And the 3rd thing you need to know is he would go down to the pub in the middle of the village, and he'd sit with his friends and buddies, and he would tell the most fantastic, unbelievable stories. And his friends would all go, "Oh, that's a bunch of baloney, Barney. That's a bunch of baloney." And that's what they called him, Baloney Barney. And Baloney Barney was walking down the middle of the village one day, and he looked across the road, and there she was. She was beautiful. She had long red hair like the tendrils of honeysuckle. She had green eyes like emeralds. Her lips were like rose petals. Her skin was white and milky like butterfly's milk. Baloney Barney slowly walked across the road and he knelt down and he looked up and he said, "Will you marry me?" And she looked down and she said, "I will." You see, it was a small village. There weren't a lot of choices. The day of the wedding came. She was beautiful, standing in the back of the little church in the middle of the village there. She had a long, lacy white gown, her grandmother's gown on, and her hair was all done up and she had flowers in her hair and she smelled of lilac. And there was Baloney Barney next to her. His hair was a mess. His clothes was dirty. And they started walking up to the front to where the priest was. Now, I don't know what exactly happened. Maybe they walked too fast up to the front. But when they got up front and were standing in front of the priest, this was Baloney Barney. But the priest started. And he said, "Now, before I marry you, I want to give you 3 blessings, so listen very carefully. The first blessing I want to give you is the blessing of riches. But riches doesn't come in the form of money. No, if a man has horses and chickens and geese and goats and pigs, that man is truly rich. The second blessing I want to bless you with is wealth. But wealth doesn't come in the form of gold and silver. It comes from heaven in the form of children. For if a man has children, he truly is wealthy. And the third blessing I want to bless you with is prosperity. And what it means to prosper is to always have a roof over your head and food on the table. Now, young maiden, do you take Baloney Barney to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do." "Baloney Barney, do you take this beautiful young maiden to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I'll do." And they were married. Now, back then, it was the glory days because they didn't have attorneys and they didn't have bankers. But the village gave them a little piece of land outside the village with a little shack on it. And they gave that to him as their wedding present. Now, when they got out to that shack, it had holes in it and it was pretty run down. And that's a good thing because it doesn't rain much in Ireland. Huh. Now, I have a question for the young girl over here and some of you ladies. Another young girl over here. If you marry a lazy man, what do you get? A lazy husband. That's right. So he didn't fix the roof. And the land was not very farmable. It had a lot of big stones and rocks all over the land. So she got a job. She got a job in town at the bakery. And didn't pay much, but it put food on the table. And every morning, early in the morning, because bakers get up early, every morning early, Noble Barney would get up with his wife to eat breakfast with her. And they'd eat breakfast and he'd go out and he'd kiss her on the forehead and he'd sit in his favorite chair on the porch there. And he'd watch as she walked up over the hill. And something pinched him. And he watched as a funny little man ran across the porch, down the steps, through the grass, through the tall grass, turned around, and went, "Ooh." And Baloney Barney stood up and he looked. And that funny little man was short and he was stout. He had a beard and he had green clothes on. What was he? A leprechaun. And everyone knows if you catch a leprechaun, he will grant your wish. "All right, leprechaun, you don't have a chance with me." And he ran across the porch, down the steps, through the grass, and he got about halfway, but it was a little too much effort for Barney. And he laid down on the grass. And he slept for several hours. And when he woke up, he looked over into the tall grass and the funny little man was still there. So, all right, leprechaun, I'm going to be catching you now. And he ran as fast as he could go and he picked up that tiny little man. His little feet were dangling like this. And he said, all right, leprechaun, I caught you fair and square. You have to grant me wish now. And what I want from you is I want to be rich. I want riches. Oh, Barney, we folk don't have a chance with you. If you want to be rich, what you have to do is go to that big hill on your property and that stone on the top of the hill and you kiss it and you'll be rich. Baloney Barney knew exactly where that hill was and that stone. And he threw down the tiny little man and he started to run as fast as he could go. He ran up the top of the hill. He got to the top of the hill. And there was a stone and he bent down and he kissed the stone. Baloney Barney kissed the stone all night long. The next morning, the warm sun on his back woke him up. And he looked around and there were cows and horses and sheep and chickens everywhere. And he slowly walked down the hill back to the shack. And he got to the shack and he opened the door. And inside the shack, there were chickens and geese and pigs. And his wife was in the corner. She said, Barney, what have you done? Your mom ever said that? Yeah. Barney, what have you done? And he said, well, I guess we're rich. And he helped her clean out the shack. The animals were out, but she was late for work. So he kissed her on the forehead. And he sat on his favorite chair on the porch and watched as she walked up over the hill. Something pitched him. And he watched as a tiny little man ran across the porch, down the steps, through the grass, to the tall grass, turned around, went. All right, leprechaun, no tricks. No tricks this time. You have to grant me wish, and I'm going to catch you. And he started running as fast as he could go. And he ran, and about halfway. How many have spouses that snore? If you're not raising your hand, you're the snorer, just so you know. Several hours later, Barney woke up and he looked over and the funny little man was still there. And he got up and he ran as fast as he could. He picked up that tiny little man. His little feet were dangling like this. He said, all right, leprechaun, you're not going to trick me this time. You have to grant me wish. And what I want from you, the wish I want from you is I want to be wealthy. I want wealth. Oh, Barney, we folk don't have a chance with you. If you want to be wealthy, what you have to do is go to that big stone on the top of the hill of your property and kiss it, and you'll be wealthy. Baloney Barney knew exactly where that was, and he threw down the tiny little man and he ran as fast as he could. He climbed up that steep hill, got to the top. There was the stone. He bent down and he kissed the stone all night long. The next morning, the warm sun on his back woke him up. And he looked around. It was the same animals as the day before. With a little sigh of relief, he climbed down the hill and walked back to the shack. And he opened the door. And there was his wife in the corner. And she was big as a hippopotamus. And she said, Barney, what have you done? And she exploded and kids went everywhere. Fat kids, skinny kids, kids that climb on rocks, tough kids, sissy kids, even kids with chicken pox. There were hundreds of kids. Barney, what have you done? And he said, well, I guess we're wealthy. He helped clean up the kids and get them out. And she was late for work. So he kissed her on the forehead. And he went and he sat on his favorite chair on the porch. And he watched as she walked up over the hill. something pinched him, and he watched as a funny little man ran across the porch, down the steps, through the grass, to the tall grass, turned around and went, all right, leprechaun, you're not going to trick me a third time. It's not going to happen. You're going to grant me wish. And he slowly walked across the porch, carefully down the stairs, across the grass, over to the tall grass, and he carefully lifted up the leprechaun. His little feet were dangling. All right, leprechaun, I got you fair and square, and you have to grant me wish. And what I want from you is I want prosperity. I want to prosper. Oh, Barney, we folk don't have a chance with you. If you want to prosper, what you have to do is go to that big stone on the top of the hill on your property and kiss it, and you'll prosper. Baloney Barney knew exactly where that stone was. And he carefully set the little man down, and he turned and he slowly walked over to the hill, and he carefully climbed up the hill, and he bent down and he lightly kissed the stone. And out of heaven fell 5 gold coins and an emerald the size of your thumb. And he picked those up and he went back to the shack. And when his wife got home, he showed her, and she was so excited. The next day, they went into town and sold the emerald for bags and bags of gold. Now, a couple questions for you ladies. Now that they're rich, is Baloney Barney still lazy? Yes, for 2 reasons. 1, he has all that money. And 2, he has all those kids to do all the work for him. That's why we have kids. Now, this story has been passed down from generation to generation in Ireland. It's an oral story. It hasn't been written down yet. Actually, it's been written down, just hasn't been illustrated. But it's been passed down from one generation to the next. And as they've passed it down, they called the story Baloney Barney Stone, the Blarney Stone. How many have heard of the Blarney Stone? How many have been to the Blarney Stone? What do you do when you get to the Blarney Stone?
Kiss it.
You kiss it. But here's a little hint. If you ever go to Ireland and you kiss the Blarney Stone, take a little handy wipe, because thousands of people have kissed that stone. It's like going to a family reunion. It's just that. Now, as I've told this story, there are some here that are non-believers. They don't believe in leprechauns. And I'm not going to point to anybody, but they're non-believers. But I'm here to tell you, I lived amongst the leprechauns for a year of my life. I lived with the leprechauns. There's a little colony. It's on a little island just off the big island of Hawaii. Maybe you've heard of it, the leprechaun colony. Thanks, Randall, for getting that. And I lived with them for a year, and I learned so many things about the leprechaun culture. And one of the things I learned is that when a leprechaun is born, they're given one of these. We call it a harmonica. They call it a mouth organ, but it's theirs, and they don't share it. And a lot of times when I get this out, a lot of the kids say, "Oh, Ted, can I please play the harmonica?" No, it's mine. And they're very possessive of it. But they taught me some magic so that no one would ever want to play my harmonica. Would you like to see some leprechaun magic right here?
Sure.
You want to see it? Does anyone want to play it?
No, thank you.
The magic worked. Now, before I left the colony, the king of the colony asked me to join him in his hut. His name was Patty. That's a nice Irish name. His last name was O'Furniture. Perhaps you've heard of him. Patty O'Furniture. And he said, Ted, before I go, I want to give you something. And he gave me his mouth organ. Now you notice it's on a chain because I tried the magic once and it got stuck. It's just easier.
And it was a little leopard.
Now with a tear in his eye, Patty looked at me and he said, Ted, when you go back out into the world, please tell the children to believe in us because we believe in them. I've never been asked to sing in the ward choir. In fact, I've been asked not to sing in the ward choir, but I'm going to sing for you. And I gave you a little hint online. Remembering back when I was a kid, I'd sneak down to the docks, watch the old men carving wood, watch the sailors tying knots. Thing that I remember best was the gray-haired old Patch Eye and the stories that he told me about his younger days as he watched the ships go by. Talk about his missing eye, talk all about his wooden leg, but he never talked about the old tattoo on his right arm that said Meg. Said he was captain of a pirate ship, sails seas both blue and green. Said all pirates got to have a patch so they can look real mean. Made the bad guys walk the plank, the pretty ladies he would save. He'd take the treasure from the ships and he'd sink them to a watery grave. Talk about his missing eye, talk all about his wooden leg, but he never talked about the old tattoo of the red-haired, brown-eyed Meg. Told me how he lost his leg as he sat there spinning yarns. Once he lost it to a mamba snake down in the Amazon. Another time he was way out west in a gunfight or so he said. That's all right, boy, a man's got two legs, I could have lost my head. Talk about his missing eye, talk all about his wooden leg. But he took the story to the grave of the red-haired, brown-eyed Meg. Talk about his missing eye, he told me all about his wooden leg. But he never talked about the old tattoo on his right arm that said Meg. Oh, now having a name like Erekson, I have Norwegian roots. So now we're going to go to Scandinavia, to Norway. And this story has a lot to do with language. How many here have learned a different language? I know Randall knows several. I think you know dragon too.
I do, yeah.
Yes. This is about languages. And sometimes it's hard learning a new language. English is a very difficult language to learn. My son-in-law, who's from the Dominican Republic, will tell you Spanish is easy. English is very difficult because you have all these differences and exceptions to the rule, and it's very difficult. Well, this story takes place in Norway a very long time ago, in ancient times. And there was an ancient troll by the name of Sven, and he lived under a bridge. And Sven loved to make homemade chocolate chip cookies. He loved to make them. When he got down and depressed, he'd make homemade chocolate chip cookies. And I want to teach you how to make homemade chocolate chip cookies in ancient Norwegian troll. Homemade is amma. Amma. Chocolate chip, this is a little hard because it has this twist like the guna. homemade chocolate chip cookies. So cookies is achu. It's like you're sneezing. Achu. So he got up one morning and he got his big bowl out and he cracked the eggs in it. And he put the flour in it and the sugar and the butter and the chocolate chips and the vanilla. Real vanilla, not the artificial stuff. And he mixed that up and he had a big oven. He got a big tray out and he put those cookies in. You could smell it. It smelled so good. And he pulled out, he made 3 dozen cookies. That's a lot of cookies for one troll. And he got them out. He said, oh, I wish I had someone to share this with. And up on the bridge, he heard clump, 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 clump. And he thought, this is awesome. And so he wrapped some of those cookies and put them in plastic just inside his shirt. And he went and he climbed up on top of that bridge. And then there was this little goat. And in his nicest ogre voice, he tried to explain that he'd made homemade chocolate chip cookies. He said, I'm not going to eat you. And that little goat, don't eat me. I'm not very tasty. Don't eat me. No, you don't want to eat me. You don't want to. I'm not gonna eat you. Now, of course, in America, when we don't speak the language, if you speak it louder and slower, they will understand you. And that's what Sven was trying to do. And it wasn't working. That poor little goat, don't eat me. Please don't eat me. Wait for my brothers. They're coming. And he went around and he clomped off the bridge. Now, Sven was very discouraged because he had those cookies that he wanted to share. And he went down into his kitchen and he just started to cry. And he was depressed. And what did he do when he was depressed? He made cookies. So he made 2 more batches. And they were sitting on the table and on the chairs and on the sink. But it smelled so good. And he was just thinking, oh, I wish I had someone to share this with. And then he heard clomp, 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 clomp. And he made sure those cookies were inside his shirt. And he climbed up on top of that bridge and there was a medium-sized goat. And in his nicest face, drool coming down, he said, I'm not gonna eat you. And that goat looked up at him and went, and passed out. Just fainted. And Sven went over to help. And leaning over, his face right there with the goats. The goat opened his eyes and he started to get up on his wobbly knees. And Sven said, I'm not gonna hurt you. And he passed out again. Sven shook his head and he climbed back down. And then he heard the goat wake up and clomp off. And he was so discouraged. And what did he do when he got discouraged? Made cookies. So he made a lot of cookies and they were on the floor. They were on the bed. They were in the bathroom. He made so many cookies and it smelled so good. And then he heard clomp, 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 clomp. And he thought someone to share. And he made sure he had those cookies wrapped in plastic in his shirt. And he climbed up to the top. And there was this big goat. It was a boar goat. Those are the biggest breeds of goats. And he had big horns. And he had this fire in his eye. And his ears kind of flopped over. So Sven thought, I better say this loud. You. And he rubbed his feet on that. And he started for Sven. He said, and that goat came and Sven went flying up into the air and fell into the river below. And he just laid there flat. Well, as flat as he could be. He still had that plastic with those cookies in it. And he just floated and he was just so sad. And he floated down for a while. And then all of a sudden this hand reached in and grabbed him and pulled him up. And when he looked up, it was this beautiful troll. She was gorgeous. She had one horn coming out the middle of her forehead. She had purple eyes with yellow yellow in the eyes. She had polka dots all over her face, and she was drooling out of the side of her mouth, and stuff was coming out of her nose. She was beautiful. And this was Helga, Sven and Helga. And Helga just smiled at him. And he reached inside his shirt and he handed her the plastic bag and he said, "I'm gonna eat you." And she giggled and laughed and they walked back to her house. Now, she lived in the hillside. Her home was just kind of nestled right in the hillside there. And they got married. They lived such a happy life. And they could hear in the distance, they could hear goats, or they could hear the thump of a goat fainting, or they could hear the stomping of feet of this big old goat. And they were happy. And out of their kitchen came the smell of those "I'm gonna eat you." Now, that recipe has been passed down in my family from generation to generation. And perhaps you've heard of it. Nestled Troll House cookies. Okay, now a story about me. Story about me. When I grew up and me and my friend Tom, and my brother Dave was a year older than me. We watched Jeremiah Johnson with Robert Redford. What a great movie about a mountain man. And there was a song, Jeremiah Johnson went up into the mountains, betting on forgetting all his troubles and his woes. And we loved the show because his first year up in the mountains, he ate fish raw. He'd catch it with his bare hands and he'd eat it raw. He had to kill a grizzly one time. I mean, he just was a hunter and he was the man. He was the epitome of the man. And that's what we wanted to be. And as we grew up, we had a gully. We called it the gully. It was a big field and area. It was huge, several acres in the back of our houses. And we'd go back there and we'd catch bugs and we'd eat praying mantises raw because we were like Jeremiah Johnson. We were men. We were men. We were mighty hunters. Mighty hunters. And as we got older and we were in junior high, the shop class, which they don't have very many shop classes anymore, unfortunately, but we got to make bows and arrows. Go figure, weapons in junior high. And we made these bows and we made arrows. And me and my friend Tom had raised some chickens. And my mom said, it's time to get rid of the chickens. And we thought, we'll take them out to the gully and hunt them. This will be awesome. So we took them out with the bows and arrows. And we closed our eyes and we counted to 100. And when we opened our eyes, they were pecking at our feet. And it's a little hard. My brother's toe never grew back.
Oh, no.
Now,
Shoot yourself in the butt.
several years ago, 2 of my kids were on missions, Ishmael and Rachel. And after they had gone out that spring, I said, Meg, we need to get chickens. I want to have chickens. And we had a little coop area and then we had to seal it up. And so we got chickens and they were awesome. And they were laying eggs and it was beautiful and wonderful. 2 of them, Juanita and Maria, they laid huevos. They didn't lay eggs, but they laid huevos. And I loved the chickens. I called them my ladies. And one Saturday I went out. And 3 of them were torn to pieces inside the coop. And I was so frustrated. And I knew it was raccoons because we'd seen the raccoons before. So we sealed up the holes in the chicken wire where there might have been problems. And I went and got traps. But I didn't get live traps. I wanted these things to suffer. So I got the big bear traps. And I figured if they got in there, it would just snap their neck and that would be that. I know you're doing that face because it's like, ooh, but you didn't do that when I told you about the chickens. So I went and got the beer and set 4 at each corner. And I put a marshmallow in because I read raccoons love marshmallows. And early Friday morning, I worked at the bank at that time. And I go to the gym before I go into the bank. And it was early in the morning, just sun barely coming up. And I looked out at the trap right by the front of the coop there. And there was a skunk laying there. And I thought, it's dead. I'll clean it up when I come home for lunch. So I came home for lunch. And his paw was caught in the trap and he was walking around. And I thought, what am I going to do now? A rose by any other name still smells as sweet. But I thought quick, Jeremiah Johnson went up into the mountains, betting on forgetting all his troubles and his woes. And I thought, I don't have a gun. I'm not against guns. I just didn't have one at the time. But I heard that if you get a cloth and cover them, they won't spray you because they can't see you. I thought, we have an old tablecloth. And I went up and I got Meg. I said, Meg, you got to come film this so we can send it to our kids on their missions. It was a new video camera. And she stood out in the middle of the yard. And I had my tablecloth, but I went to the garage and I got a sledgehammer. And I thought I would thump this skunk under the cloth and I'd be done. So Meg, I said, press this button, and she's back there. She wouldn't get very close at all. And I slowly went up with that tablecloth and I covered that skunk. And I thought, I'm halfway there. I'm Jeremiah Johnson. This is awesome. And I got my trusty sledgehammer. And when I hit, that tablecloth came down. That skunk's rear end came up and his anus bloomed. Now I learned something. This is a lesson for all of you. If a skunk ever sprays you, don't do this. It went in my mouth. It went all over my face. Luckily, I had glasses on at the time. It was all over my skin, this yellow oil that just, and I was screaming and crying like a little girl. And Meg said, well, at least it didn't hit in the face. I'm like, tears coming out of my eyes, coughing and hacking. And then I thought again, I need to finish this or I got to come out again.
Oh, no.
So I'm coughing and hacking and pounding on this poor critter. And when I knew he was gone, I set the sledgehammer down and I started to run in the house, but I started to rip off my clothes to get the stink off. Naked, I ran upstairs and I got in the shower and I scrubbed and I cleaned. We threw away the scrubby, the shower curtain, the soap, the clothes. Tomato juice doesn't work. It just smells like tomato juice got squirted by a skunk. So I scrubbed and cleaned up. I had to go back to the bank because I had to close that night. So I went down at lunch and I said, Meg, does it still stink? And she said, everything stinks. I said, well, at least we got it on film. And I pulled out the camera and I told her to press the wrong button. So we don't have it on film. I know we could have won America's Funniest Videos, but I had to go back to work. And when I walked in, it was this small little branch and they said, Ted, you stink so bad. And they lit candles, which you're not supposed to do in a commercial building. And customers would come in and they'd say, did you spray for bugs? Because it stinks in here. Finally, Kmart was just right next door. And I walked over to Kmart and I looked in the air freshener aisle because they have those, they've advertised them before when I was a kid, those little orange vials that would get rid of any stink. They don't have them. So I went back to the car department and I was rubbing those little pine trees all over me. Now, I learned something. Who knows what a group of skunks is? What it's called? Close. It's a stench. It's a stench of skunks. And a skunk by any other name still smells. That's it. All right. I grew up in a wonderful home. My mom was the disciplinarian. When me and Dave were little kids, my mom, we get into trouble, and my mom, she would get our belts and she'd give us a whooping. Now, today you can't do that. Back then it was discipline. Now it's you get in trouble. But we deserved every whooping we got. And one time me and Dave got into so much trouble. Our room was downstairs. We ran downstairs and we went in our room and we thought, let's hide the belts. Let's just hide the belts. So we hid the belts. And Mom came in and that vein on her forehead was throbbing like this. And she looked for those belts and she was so flustered, she ran out of the room. And me and Dave were like, yeah, we don't get a whooping. And then just as we said that, Mom is standing in the doorway, her vein throbbing like this, but in her right hand is a fuller brush. Fuller brushes have bristles like nails. And she didn't just whack us. She made us drop our drawers, and on our bare butt, she beat us till we bled. Now, this is my memory. She beat our butts till we bled. Now, fast forward. I have kids of my own. They tell you to have dinner together. And then they'll stay out of gangs and drugs and all those things. So we had dinner together and we talked about our lives. And I told them about how my mom would beat my bare butt till it bled. One time we went to visit Grandma Lou. Isaac, our oldest, decided to be brave. Grandma Lou, is it true that you beat my dad's butt till it bled? And do you know what my mom said? She said, do I look like a woman that would do such a thing? I'm like, yes, you do. I was 4 years old. Dave was 5. To this day, he's still a year older than I am. And we got sick. We had fevers. We had sweat, the swollen glands, the cough, the sore throat. And Mom came into our bedroom and she said, Teddy and Dave, we're going to go see Dr. Giddings at the Olympus Clinic. And we loved going to the Olympus Clinic because every time you go to the Olympus Clinic, you would get a sucker. And that sucker made everything worth it. But looking back as a parent and a grandparent, they were dumb suckers because they had little ropes instead of sticks, so you couldn't poke someone in the eye. But when you open it and you start saying it drips and it sticks down on your hands and gets you all gooey and messy. It was awesome as a kid. And that sucker made everything worth it. And she got us dressed and we went out to the car. And the car was an old green Rambler. And it didn't have seatbelts. We didn't use them back then. We didn't have them back then. And you know what? You didn't need them because that back seat had little pokey things on the material. And it was like Velcro, and you'd throw the kids in the back and they'd stick. And you couldn't move. Mom threw us in the back. She pulled out of the driveway and we went to the Olympus Clinic. We got to the parking lot. She got out. She peeled us off the back seat and we walked up to the front doors of the clinic. Now, from this point in the story, Mom does not look us in the eye. She opened the doors to the clinic and the odor wafted out. We could smell the formaldehyde. They were keeping all the dead body parts in the back end. We went in and there were two couches, a big people couch and a little people couch. Me and Dave sat on the little people couch. Mom sat on the big couch. She put up the magazine. She did not look us in the eye. Me and Dave were doing this. And then we heard it. They were torturing a child in the back. We could hear it screaming. We were doing this now. A nurse came out. Erekson, Mom stood up. She did not look us in the eye. We followed the nurse back to the examining room. The nurse left. Mom sat on the chair, put up the magazine, and me and Dave were looking around. And in walked Dr. Giddings. And he had a satellite dish on his forehead. Why did he have? They weren't even invented yet. And he got a little hammer out and he hit our knees and he looked in our ears and he took our temperature. And then he took 2 sticks with cotton swabs on the end. And he left the room. And about 15 minutes later, he came back in and he said, well, Teddy and Dave, you have strep throat. And then he walked out of the room. Mom didn't move. She did not look us in the eye. We waited for a few more minutes and another nurse came in. Follow me. Mom stood up. We followed the nurse down the hallway. And then she turned down a dark corridor. And she stopped at this big metal door. And it had a window in it with chicken wire in it. And she unlocked the door. And when she opened the door, we could see scratch marks on the inside of the door. We went in, Mom sat in the only chair, put up the magazine. Me and Dave were looking around. The door closed and locked. And as we're looking around, besides the chair my mom was in, there was a hospital gurney, a little bed with wheels on the bottom. And next to that was a big metal cabinet. And as we're looking around, we heard the door unlock. And in she walked, Nurse June. I hate the month of June because of Nurse June. She had bright red hair like the flames of hell. She had deep blue eyes like the embers of a fire. And she had one of those faces where her lipstick went up, but her face went down. She went over to that metal cabinet and she opened it. She was fussing around like this. We could hear metal and glass clanking. And she turned like this, like we couldn't see. It was a big metal syringe like they use on cattle. And the needle was this long. And she said, Teddy, you're first. And what I heard her say was, now, when you go get a shot today, you go in, you roll up your sleeve, boop, 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 and you're done. Not Nurse June. She wanted a bigger muscle. So while I was getting ready, she went to the other side of the room to get a running start. And she ran and she jammed it in, clear to the bone. My eyeballs were out to here. And she tried to squeeze it in, but because it was in the bone, she pulled it out just a little. And then she moved it around. Why did they move it around? The stuff inside the syringe was thick as honey. I know this for 2 reasons. One, as she pushed it in, she made this noise. And 2, as it went in, my cheek was getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And when it was all in, she tried to pull it out, but she couldn't because it was so swollen. So she put her foot on my other cheek and she made the sound again. She pulled it out. Blood went everywhere. I looked over at Dave. He didn't even know he got a shot. He passed out. When we were limping to the front door, I said, just a minute, Mom. She did not look me in the eye. I turned and went back to the nurse's counter. And I lifted up my head best I could. And I said, "Can I get my sucker, please?" And they handed me my sucker. Purple grape, my favorite flavor to this day. And I opened it and I started sucking on it. And we went out and Mom threw us in the back seat. And she got in the front. And she started the car. And I peeled down my hand with that sucker in it. And I started sucking. It was getting all sticky and gooey. And I looked in front of me and Mom's hair was coming down the back of the seat. And I reached up with that. And I will tell you, that sucker made everything worth it. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much. I was laughing like crazy and I was hearing you guys here and those on the live stream. Yep. I'm talking to you. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Great. Huh? Yeah. 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 Let's get it. Yeah. Ooh. Okay. Now, you know what I was saying, energy. Do you get it now?
Yeah.
And the percentages. Remember the fracture? Did you get a percentage in your head? Have you changed your mind? Do you have a new percentage in your head? No. I would. So afterwards, when we linger and mingle and all that fun stuff, maybe tell him what percentage you did guess. Maybe he might be interested in that. The other thing is, this is a fundraising concert, and we do donations, and so there's many ways to do that. Some I've already actually probably. All of you have already done that already, but if you haven't, you just go to storycrossroads.org/donate. And that's something that for those live stream, you'll see that on the lower left, it's already says that. It says his name. It also says that web address. And that way you can say that thank you. Just so you know what happens with those donations is that's how we're able to then say thank you to Ted. And it's also a fundraiser for Story Crossroads. So it does help both. So it's always a wonderful thing. We are grateful to many organizations that continue to fund us through the years, such as Utah Humanities, such as Utah Division of Arts Museums, such as the Western States Arts Federation, the Salt Lake City Arts Council. We've just had so much wonderful support, and then we get the support from you individually. It makes a difference. Those who are here live, we get to have a little bit of refreshments, and there'll be some water and everything back there. Again, thank you to the Gibsons. Round of applause to the Gibsons. Woo. And then another round of applause to Ted Erekson. And just so you know, you're going to wonder, this was the 73rd house concert. What about the 74th? Well, the 74th will have 4 tellers because there's a 4 in 74th, right?
Right.
That's how it works, kind of, sometimes. So that's going to be, we jump around. We're in Ogden, Utah right now. We're going to jump to Draper, Utah for next month. That will be Friday, September 22nd. And so our 4 storytellers for that will be Carla Huntsman, Paige Funk. It will be Suzanne Hudson and Janine Evans. So those will be our 4. They're going to do stories of wisdom and wonder. And I'm going to actually share the screen so that those of you watching this or watching later, you'll be able to see that as well. And until we tell again, enjoy, mingle, mingle, mingle.
And the weather cooperated.
Yes, it
Yes,
did.
it is.